And I had tremendous, respect for Jim Mattis. We'd worked together closely before. I thought the world of him. But what made me pause was I felt that on just about every policy issue that Trump had talked about in the campaign, I was not aligned. And so the question is, could I serve a president whose policies I did not believe in, or would I simply be like, as I jokingly said, Hamlet on the Potomac, to resign or not to resign? I mean, like, you don't want to be having that conversation with yourself every day. And the moment of clarity for me was actually when President Trump surprised Jim Mattis by announcing the travel ban at his swearing in. And I was so appalled by the travel ban. That was like, okay, no, now it's clear. I can't be part of this. So, but I think people really have to do a moral stock taking. I do think having a sense of duty is great. Choosing a great boss is important, critical. But at the end of the day, you have to know whether you can live with yourself being part of a larger effort. And I just couldn't get there.
One of the event that you just talked about, the signing of the travel ban, Dr. Shockey in our first episode said that was the absolute nadir for her in terms of civil-military relations recently.
Yeah.
And it's part of this kind of broader narrative that we've talked about a lot with the politicization of the military, appropriating military service members and military backdrops for political ends. Is that something that you're concerned about?
Very concerned about it. I think, when you see retired general officers speaking at political national conventions, you had Mike Flynn at the Republican National Convention last time, leading chants of lock her up. You had, John Allen, who was much better behaved and a gentleman, but was, in a political role as a retired general officer. And I think for most Americans that they look at someone who's a retired flag or general officer, and their first name is going to always be general or admiral. And so the fact that they're retired doesn't really make much of an impression. I think one of the strengths of our military in a democracy is that it is outside of politics. It stays out of politics. It supports the Constitution, not a particular political party, not a particular leader. That is critical to the success of our system. And I think it starts to erode when we have military people showing up in political roles.
Admiral MacMillen said on this podcast that retired flag officers just need to stay out of politics. They need to stay silent. But Admiral Stavridis on our podcast has said the opposite, that he thinks it's totally okay for retired flag officers to participate in politics because he believes the American public is sophisticated enough to understand the difference between retired and active duty. What's your take on that dichotomy between those two beliefs?
And also, if I could follow up, your take on the dichotomy, and then also just like what role can retired general officers play in the political system, or do they need to just go away?
I think the retired general officers and flag officers are an incredible national resource. And I think it's entirely appropriate for them to advise candidates, to help, be resources for political leaders, even to serve in appointed positions on occasion. I mean, when Mattis was appointed Secretary of Defense, a reporter asked me, "Are you comfortable with this 4-star general being appointed as Secretary of Defense?" And I said, "Well, do you remember the last time this happened?" He sort of looked at me. I said, 70 years ago with George C. Marshall. I think once every 70 years is probably okay. But this is not something we should make a habit of. So I draw a distinction, though, between, general officers contributing to advising civilians and even occasionally being in some appointed positions, as opposed to becoming part of a political campaign themselves. Now, you do have a situation where after a decent interval, some people go to run for office. We've had one of the largest groups of veterans now ever elected to Congress, at least in the post 9/11 period. I think that's a good thing. So I don't agree with either extreme. I think it's finding the appropriate middle ground, but I think we have to do this very, very carefully to protect the institution of the military from being politicized.
So there are many policy students here at the Harris School who will one day go into public service and policy, and they might not have anything to do with national security or defense, but they could still be very influential at the federal or state or municipal level. What's one thing that you want them to know about the military?
I have found that the military is full of altruists who are focused on serving a higher purpose, who are focused on the nation's mission, and who really sort of fall in that tradition of putting something larger than themselves ahead of their own interests. I think it's as a group of people, it's an extraordinary group of people. One of the things I enjoyed most in the Pentagon was not only the mission, but the people that I got to work with. So I think I would say appreciate that and find a way to get to know them. One of the things that worries me about our civil-military relations is that fewer than 1% of our population serves, and fewer than, I think it's like 5% or 10% even know someone in the military. And it's this revered institution, incredibly important to our national security, but we need to work to kind of bridge that gap and make sure that it's not a mystery. It's not something we don't understand on the civilian side, that we make our effort not just to thank someone for their service in the airport, but to actually reach out and get to know someone and engage with them.
Well, Ms. Flournoy, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We really appreciated all your insights and your time.
Great. Thank you, and good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right.
Thanks for joining us today on Thank You for Your Service. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at TYFYS_podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, so you'll get our next episode as soon as it's released.
Thank You for Your Service is produced by Haz Yano, Aishwarya Kumar, and Mary Martha Maclay. Special thanks to Lieutenant Alberto Ramos. This podcast is a production of the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts and is in no way intended to reflect the official positions of the Department of Defense or any other military entity. I'm Thomas Krasnican.
And I'm Nick Paraiso. See you next time.
Chicago, the Windy City, the city of broad shoulders, the second city, is complicated.
Known for its legacies of segregation and political corruption, Chicago has a lot to grapple with.
On Chicagoland, we bring you conversations with activists, journalists, politicians, and others who are working to address these issues.
You can find Chicagoland wherever you listen to podcasts.
From University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts,
this is Chicagoland.